The first city they burned was Reykjavik, not because it was strategic. The analysts would spend months arguing about that afterward, filling white papers with theories about geothermal infrastructure and symbolic value, and the psychological effect of watching something so clean and cold turn to glass. But Maren Dahl, who had been a systems coordinator for the International Energy Commission, and who had watched the feed from a bunker 300 kilometers away, did not believe any of the theories. She thought they burned it because they could. Because burning was what the Sarathi did, and they wanted Earth to know that before it had time to think of an answer. The warship was shaped like a dragon. That detail kept surfacing in the after-action reports as though it mattered. As though some cultural anthropologist had filed the wrong form. It was 2 kilometers long. Its forward array swept plasma in horizontal bands, methodical as a farmer turning soil. The Icelandic Defense Force scrambled 6 interceptors. The warship did not change course or speed. The interceptors ceased to exist. Maren watched until the feed cut out. Then she sat in the dark for a while and thought about her mother, who had lived in Reykjavik, and who now, by any reasonable calculation, did not. She was 29. She had a degree in energy systems integration and a secondary certification in field communications. She had never held a weapon in her life. By the time the IEC formally activated the Gatchaman program 16 days later, she had held several. The team briefing room smelled like recycled air and burned coffee. Maren arrived 4 minutes early and found she was the last one there. She knew them by file. Hideo sat nearest the door, arms crossed, jaw working on nothing. He was technically their leader. Former JSDF, citation for valor, 2 commendations he never mentioned, and 1 reprimand he also never mentioned. He had a way of being still that felt less like patience than like a weapon set to safety. Across from him was Yusra, who was cleaning her fingernails with a folded piece of paper, and who had survived the fall of the Casablanca hub by spending 6 hours in a maintenance crawlspace with 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. She had never confirmed or denied the story. Next to her was Dimitri, who was large and quiet and had a habit of humming songs Maren didn't recognize. And beside him was Suyun, who at 19 was the youngest of them and whose IEC psych profile flagged her as having, in the assessor's careful phrasing, a high comfort with unstructured risk. None of them looked at Maren when she sat down. Commander Okafor came in 2 minutes later and put a satellite image on the wall. "The warship has changed course," he said. "It's heading for the Agadir relay. If it reaches the relay and the relay's backup nodes go down, we lose the Mantell grid across 4 continents. Food distribution, water filtration, emergency power. The Motzels say 70 million people within 90 days. He paused, not for effect, just paused. "The standard assets won't touch it. You've seen the intercept data." "The armor," Hideo said. "Conventional ordnance deflects. We had a moment 2 weeks ago when a French submarine got a torpedo within 40 meters before the escort drones destroyed it. 40 meters and it still didn't penetrate." Hideo looked at the image for a long time. "So we go inside. You go inside." The silence that followed was not the silence of people who were afraid to speak. It was the silence of people doing arithmetic. "The Phoenix can match the warship's speed," Maren said. "I've run the intercept corridor. There's a ventral bay that cycles every 90 seconds during what we think is a cooling sequence. A gap in the hull sensors. If we come in low and fast at the right angle—" "You've already planned this," Yusra said. It wasn't quite an accusation. "I've been planning this since Reykjavik." Yusra looked at her for a moment, then nodded once, slowly, and went back to her paper. The Phoenix was a beautiful and impractical machine. It had been designed by a woman named Dr. Adeze Nanadi, who had died in the Accra bombing 6 months before the program was activated, which meant that its creator never saw it fly, and that everyone who flew it was carrying that fact like ballast. It moved through atmosphere at speeds that should have torn it apart, guided by a flight system that Maren had helped calibrate over 300 hours of simulations, and that she still did not entirely trust. She sat in the systems bay as they closed on the warship and watched the hull temperature readings climb, and tried not to think about what was on the other side of the hull. Hideo's voice came through the earpiece, flat and precise. 3 minutes to the cooling window. Everyone confirm. Confirmations came back: Yusra, Dimitri, Suyan, Maren. "When we're inside," Hideo said, "we split into 2 teams. Yusra and Dimitri take the power coupling array on sublevel 3. Maren's map the route. Suyan, you're with me. We find the command hub and we take it offline. Not destroy it, take it offline. We need 30 seconds of system interruption to create the window for Marin to reach the primary drive core. And if I can't reach the drive core in 30 seconds? Marin asked. A pause. Then you have 31. She almost laughed. Didn't. The ventral bay opened on schedule, a long, slow exhalation of superheated gas, and the Phoenix slipped through like a knife entering water. Inside, the warship was wrong in every direction. That was the only word Marin could find for it. The corridors were the right width for a body to move through, but they curved in ways that eyes didn't want to follow. The lighting, if you called it that, came from somewhere behind the walls rather than from a source, a pale blue-gray that made everyone look slightly dead. The air tasted of something metallic and organic at once, like the smell of a wound in cold weather. The Sarathi they encountered in the first corridor were not what the briefings had prepared her for. The briefings had been thorough. Marin had spent 40 hours with the contact footage, analyzing structure and movement. It had not prepared her for the sound they made when they moved, a dry clicking of articulated plates, like someone shuffling cards very fast, or for the way they tracked with all their sensory organs at once, so that there was no angle from which you could approach them that didn't feel like a front. Hideo went through the first 3 in under 4 seconds. It was not flashy. He moved in tight angles, conserving momentum, using the corridor walls twice as bracing points. Afterward, he checked his left hand, flexed the fingers twice, and said, "Move," in the same voice he used for everything. Su Yian, Marin noticed, had already moved. She was already 12 meters ahead, crouched at the next junction, head tilted, counting the clicks. They split at the subdeck access. Yusra paused long enough to grip Marin's arm once, say nothing, and then she and Dimitri were gone into the blue-gray dark. Marin followed Hideo. The command hub was a sphere. That was the first thing she registered. A perfect sphere, 3 meters across, and suspended in a lattice of filaments at the center of a chamber with no obvious floor. The filaments pulsed in sequences. She'd spent enough time with the energy signatures to recognize what she was seeing. A distributed cognition node, the warship's central coordination system. Not a computer so much as a throat through which all the ship's intention passed. There were 8 Sarathi in the chamber, arranged at intervals around the sphere in postures that suggested ritual more than function. Su Yan looked at Marin. Marin looked at the sphere. Hideo looked at both of them and then at the 8 Sarathi. "The filament sequence," he said quietly. "You need physical access to interrupt it." "Yes, how close?" 2 meters. The chamber was 12 meters across. Hideo exhaled once through his nose. Su Yan. "Already counting," she said. What happened next was not something Marin could reconstruct accurately afterward. She knew that Hideo moved first, drawing the Sarathi away from the sphere along the lattice's outer edge, using the curved geometry of the chamber in ways that shouldn't have been possible. But then, that was the thing about Hideo that no psych profile ever quite captured. He didn't move through space the way other people did. He moved through it as though it had been arranged for him specifically. She knew that Su Yan was creating noise and threat vectors along the opposite arc, keeping the Sarathi's collective attention fractured. 3 clicks to the left and 2 to the right, and none of them quite able to resolve the pattern into a single target. She knew that she was running, crouched low, across the lattice work, and that the filaments were humming at a frequency she could feel in her molars, and that, somewhere below whatever passed, for the chamber floor there was a 2-kilometer warship, carrying enough plasma capacity to glass a continent. She reached the sphere. The interrupt sequence was 17 steps. She had memorized it in the bunker at Reykjavik, while her mother's city was still burning. She had repeated it in simulation until it lived in her hands rather than her head, until her fingers knew the shape of it the way they knew the shape of sleep. She ran it in 11 seconds. The sphere went dark. The filaments stopped pulsing. The Sarathi made a sound she had never heard in any of the contact footage. Not the card shuffling clicks, but something lower. Something that resonated in the sternum, like the first note of a frequency that hadn't finished arriving. They went very still, Hideo's voice in the earpiece entirely calm. "We have the window, Marin. Drive core. Now." The drive core was 300 meters aft, through a ship that had just lost its coordination center and was beginning in small ways to know it. She ran. She was not a soldier. She had a degree in energy systems integration and a secondary recertification in field communications, and a grief she had been carrying for 16 days that she had not yet had time to put down. She ran through corridors full of Sarathi, who were clicking rapidly and not yet reorganized, and she thought about Okafor's figure, 70 million people in 90 days. And she thought about her mother, and she ran. The drive core did not look like a weapon. It looked like a heart. It was enormous, easily 20 meters across, a torus of compressed plasma, rotating at a speed that made the air around it shimmer and bend. The light it threw was warm, the warmest thing she'd encountered since boarding. For a strange moment, coming through the access hatch with her hands already moving toward the interface panel, she thought about how alien it was that something so dangerous could look so much like something alive. She thought about Dr. Nanati, who had designed the Phoenix and who had never seen it fly. She opened the interface panel. The destabilization protocol wasn't destruction. Not exactly. It was more like introducing a question into a system that had been designed to only have answers. She fed the sequence in, watched the plasma rotation begin to wobble at the edges, and had just enough time to think, I hope Yusra and Dmitri are out, before she was moving back toward the access hatch at a dead sprint. The Phoenix was waiting where they'd left it, which was the first good news. The second good news was Yusra, already aboard and bleeding from her left arm, and Dmitri, who had a burn across the side of his neck that he was ignoring completely while he ran pre-launch checks. The third good news was Suyan and then Hideo, in that order, through the ventral hatch. Hideo sealed it behind him. His face was unreadable. Drive core, he said. Destabilized, Marin said. We have maybe 4 minutes. Then we have 4 minutes. He moved to the pilot's seat. The Phoenix dropped out of the warship's ventral bay like a stone dropped from a great height, and below them the world was dark and whole and still there, and above them, already, even now, the warship's drive core was asking the question she had put into it, and the answer was beginning to light up the sky. They watched it from 4 kilometers out, hovering at the edge of the blast radius Marin had calculated. The warship did not explode so much as disarticulate, its plasma containment failing in sequence, each cascade feeding the next, the dragon shape unmaking itself from the inside out in a bloom of light that was, she had to admit, terrible and extraordinary. No one spoke for a while. Then Dmitri started humming. She didn't recognize the tune. She wasn't sure it was a real song. Hideo turned from the window. He looked at Marin for a moment with the expression she was learning to read, as something between acknowledgement and something that didn't have a name yet. Good work, he said. It was not a speech. It was not a declaration. It was 2 words from a man who did not use more than he needed, which meant, she was beginning to understand, that it was everything. Yusra was already wrapping her own arm with practiced efficiency. She caught Marin's eye and made a small gesture, chin tilt almost imperceptible, that Marin interpreted correctly as you did good, or possibly we're alive, or possibly both. With Yusra, the 2 often seemed to mean the same question into a system that had been designed to only have answers. She fed the sequence in, watched the plasma rotation begin to wobble at the edges, and had just enough time to think, I hope Yusra and Dmitri are out, before she was moving back toward the access hatch at a dead sprint. The Phoenix was waiting where they'd left it, which was the first good news. The second good news was Yusra, already aboard and bleeding from her left arm, and Dmitri, who had a burn across the side of his neck that he was ignoring completely while he ran pre-launch checks. The third good news was Suyan and then Hideo, in that order, through the ventral hatch. Hideo sealed it behind him. His face was unreadable. Drive core, he said. Destabilized, Marin said. We have maybe 4 minutes. Then we have 4 minutes. He moved to the pilot's seat. The Phoenix dropped out of the warship's ventral bay like a stone dropped from a great height, and below them the world was dark and whole and still there, and above them, already, even now, the warship's drive core was asking the question she had put into it, and the answer was beginning to light up the sky. They watched it from 4 kilometers out, hovering at the edge of the blast radius Marin had calculated. The warship did not explode so much as disarticulate, its plasma containment failing in sequence, each cascade feeding the next, the dragon shape unmaking itself from the inside out in a bloom of light that was, she had to admit, terrible and extraordinary. No one spoke for a while. Then Dmitri started humming. She didn't recognize the tune. She wasn't sure it was a real song. Hideo turned from the window. He looked at Marin for a moment with the expression she was learning to read, as something between acknowledgement and something that didn't have a name yet. "Good work," he said. It was not a speech. It was not a declaration. It was 2 words from a man who did not use more than he needed, which meant she was beginning to understand that it was everything. Yusra was already wrapping her own arm with practiced efficiency. She caught Marin's eye and made a small gesture, chin tilt almost imperceptible, that Marin interpreted correctly as "you did good," or possibly "we're alive," or possibly both. With Yusra, the two often seemed to mean the same thing. Su Yan was watching the last light of the warship fade. She had a small cut on her forehead she hadn't mentioned. She was 19, and her psych profile said she was comfortable with unstructured risk, which Marin now understood meant something different than it had sounded in a briefing room. It meant she had the capacity to act clearly in the moment when everything around her was coming apart. It meant she was built for this in a way that most people weren't, and that she knew it, and that it sat on her quietly, like a weight she'd learned to carry young. "They'll send another one," Suyan said. Not a question. "Yes," Hideo said. "Then we'll do this again." He looked at her. "Yes," she nodded just once and sat back. The Phoenix banked south toward the Agatar relay, which was still standing. And below them the coastline was dark, except for the scattered lights of cities that had not yet been burned. Which meant cities that were still worth protecting. Which meant there was still something to do and somewhere to be, and a reason to keep the engine running. Marin thought about Reykjavik. She thought about the 17-step interrupt sequence living in her hands. She thought about Dr. Nanadi, who had built the ship they were flying in and never seen it fly, and she thought that maybe that was something, that the things you build to outlast you sometimes do. She did not put her grief down. She didn't think you were supposed to. She thought you were supposed to carry it into the next room and the room after that, and that was what she did. The Phoenix flew south through the dark, and the dark held for now and 5 humans who had gone into the belly of a dragon and come back out again. Sat together in a machine built by a woman who had believed it was possible, which it turned out it was. They were sometimes 5, sometimes 1, they flew on.